Now we move on to the next session. I request the panelist, chairperson and the moderator to switch on their camera, unmute themselves, starting with Dr. T.S. Surendran, Dr. Hema Malini Samant, Dr. Kalpana Narendran, Dr. Suma Ganesh, Dr. Love. Over to the panelist. We can you can take over the session.
Sorry, you will have to unmute yourself.
Hi, Dr. Lau. Is Dr. Kalpana, Dr. Suma, Emalni, all are there?
Yes, sir, I'm here. Dr. Suma,
nice to see you, Suma. What about Kalpana?
I'm afraid I cannot see Dr. Kalpana in the meeting.
Okay. Love is there.
She was there.
Okay, this is actually debatable debates in pediatric ophthalmology. And I would request Dr. Suma Ganesh to take over the proceedings. And as and when I think I will pass the comments. So, Dr. Suma, please.
thank you, sir. I think we should begin our session. Dr. I think the first session is the first debate. I think we are going to have a very interesting debate session. The first debate is on posterior optic capture versus in the bag IOL for pediatric cataract surgery. And this is going to be debated in the bag IOL, Dr. Dipti Joshi, and post optic capture, Dr. Jaspreet Sukija, and it will be commented upon by Dr. Sumita Agarkar. I hope all are ready. Dr. Dipti.
I'm sorry, Dr. Dipti cannot be seen in the session.
Dr. Jaspreet, I saw, is there.
Yes, he is there.
Or we go to the next one and then we wait for Dr. Dipti because it's...
Sure, ma'am. Yes, we can do that to save the time.
Yeah.
I have to go to another session, so probably maybe after a few minutes or what. How should we do it? I thought I'll finish this session and then go there.
Yeah, I know. No idea about Dipti, no.
Yeah. It's better that he speaks and because time is.
Vitreous access scaffold, sometimes it comes in the way and creates a larger PC opening. So those are issues with vitrectomy. And is the bag big enough to accommodate the IOL in young children and infants? That's a big question. So keeping the vitreous intact is very important because it acts as a barrier between the anterior and the posterior segment. And in a growing eye, we are still not aware of the consequences later in life. How much vitrectomy is adequate, we still don't know, even though we stain it with the triamcinolone. Strands of vitreous may come in the anterior chamber, and so enlargement of PPC can occur, precluding an implantation of IOL in the bag. So there are a lot of issues. This is one of the highlights of the American Journal of Ophthalmology series was that the more you do the vitrectomy, the higher the chances of secondary glaucoma. So in a you can say an immature trabecular meshwork in a child, if you do a vitrectomy, we're adding on to that risk of glaucoma. So I'll just share a short video here. Sorry. So this is how we do a posterior optic capture. Basically, just a zonular cataract when we do the perform a rhexis, and the size really is okay. I mean, even though if you get a larger or maybe slightly smaller, doesn't matter. So we do a posterior rhexis. The posterior rhexis has to be done carefully because it has to be larger than a conventional rhexis. What we do, as we want the IOL to prolapse, the optic to prolapse posteriorly. So we fill the bag with the viscoelastic and first implant the IOL inside the bag. So you can see here a large posterior rhexis. This is a 3-piece IOL which is going to go into the bag. We are dialing it into the bag, and then gently what we'll do is we're going to nudge one optic behind the posterior capsule edge and then the other part of the optic. So this way what we get is an oblong posterior capsule that shows that it has been captured. The haptics are in the bag and the optic is behind the posterior capsule. So this is a comparison what we had done, and we've shown good results with the posterior optic capture, and we had less inflammation as compared to children with the conventional IOL in the bag. So it's a promising alternative to conventional pediatric surgery, significantly less inflammatory response. The bag is sealed, so no chances of lens of proliferation, no risk of geometric decentration, as the IOL is locked between the posterior capsule, avoids the ill effects of vitrectomy, shorter operating time, COVID era. So obviously you would want this, and avoiding the growing bag and using the Burgess space as an alternative, especially in infants. So this is just to show you what we have done. This is the IOL in the bag. You can say a 2 years follow-up what we had. And this is a perfectly clear visual axis with an optic capture. So with probably, I would leave it to you what you want to have. Maybe if your child is getting operated, what would you prefer? Thank you so much.
Now we are open for 1 minute of comments.
Sumita Dr. Sumita is there, no? Yeah, she's around.
Since I put it in the bag, I will debate with Dr. Jaspreet here. So his is a good technique, but only it limits you to a certain kind of IOLs, and 3-piece IOLs sometimes they are not that easy to implant, especially for beginners. So it requires a little bit of for posterior capsular capture. It requires a little bit of learning curve and a little bit of experience to do it really well the way he has done it. So, but in the bag is relatively learning curve is probably smaller. A lot of people are very comfortable putting the IOL in the intact posterior capsule and then lifting the IOL with 23 gauge vitrectomy and all. They are able to create a fairly generous opening. Having said that, I think there is some food for thought about oxidative stress which vitrectomy can bring to the trabecular meshwork. And probably this point is more applicable when we are really dealing with infants. When I say infants, I don't strictly mean between first 1 month, but say under 6 months of age, where glaucoma is definitely very high compared to older children. So I guess in older children, it does not matter. You should do what works best in your hands, whether you are doing in the bag IOL implantation with a posterior capsulotomy or you are doing a thing. But in younger children, probably this is a good technique to learn to put it behind. Only thing is you should have a sufficient surgical experience and wherewithal to deal with complications should there be any. Thank you.
Dr. Jaspreet, I have a question. You have not seen opacification of the posterior capsule without vitrectomy in a small child?
Yeah, so we published that photograph which I was saying was 2 years results. So it's a randomized study between bilateral cataract where we did the conventional in one eye and the optic capture in the other eye. So that's a 2-year study, and now we followed up those patients for 5 years. And we are seeing that there is no vitreous opacification in these cases. Probably we have around, maybe you can say 10 or 12 infants in this series, but yes, we will need to do more, and then probably can come out with some good evidence, but the preliminary results are encouraging.
Looking at the time constraint, can we move to the next speakers?
I'll only say, okay. The next is topic is plication versus resection. Dr. Elizabeth, can you go first with resection, and then Dr. Varsha wants to go second with plication. And the comments are by Dr. Shubhangi Bhave. Dr. Elizabeth?
Dr. Elizabeth is there.
No, she's there. She's there.
Yes.
I'll be talking on plication, not resection.
Yeah, I know, but Dr. Varsha wanted to go second on resection.
Dr. Elizabeth, you are on mute. Your PPT is visible.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible now.
Again, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a talk on plication versus resection. See, both plication and resection are strengthening procedures. Plication is a thymol procedure where initially they used to tuck the muscle on itself, but nowadays the modified plication, we tuck the muscle on itself and suture it to the sclera. This is compared with the resection. Actually, Dr. Kenneth Wright has published a paper on this. I'll show you a small video about plication. Plication, the rectus muscle is isolated on the muscle hook, and the 6-0 vicryl suture are passed at the desired plication amount posterior to the insertion, and then the sutures are passed using partial scleral thickness passes adjacent to the muscle insertion, that is in front of the muscle insertion. And then when you pull on these sutures, the muscle gets folded on itself, and it becomes tight like that. You can see the fold now, and then the suture is tight enough, and if you want, you can put extra sutures. That is how plication is done. And coming to the advantages of plication over resection, you see, the first and foremost, this is less traumatic. Here the muscle is not cut, so there is less trauma to the ciliary circulation and the nerves, and there is less postoperative pain. Because of the less surgical trauma, there is bleeding is less, risk of anterior segment ischemia is not there, risk of lost muscle is not at all there, and the chances of slipped muscle, stress scar, etc. are also not there. So plication is superior in its safety when you compare it with resection. Plication is reversible if you do it in the early stages. And the often quoted disadvantage is that it will produce an unsightly scar. But in my cases, I have not seen an unsightly scar. See, I'll show you the plication. I'll quote Dr. Demmer. He has said that plication does not produce an unsightly scar. This picture is of my own personal collection. This is the second day. You can see that this scar is not very thick. The next disadvantage often quoted is that resection is time tested while plication is not time tested. But there is enough long-term results already available now to show that there is a sustained effect of plication. Remember, science progress only when new things are tried. This is, I will show you a personal collection, residual exotropia after bilateral resection. I wanted to do medial rectus resection. I did a plication on the medial rectus, left medial rectus. You can see that the eyes are straight 2 weeks later, and the cosmetic advantage is very good. And I have reviewed the literature. I'm quoting 2 articles, one from Chowdhury et al. And the other Sukuja et al. Both of them have compared large number of plications versus resection, and ultimate long-term results are comparable. That is the literature study. And is it possible to do adjustable suture? Yes, that also is possible. Adjustable sutures technique also is possible. So I would like to conclude that modified plication is always superior to resection. This is safer and faster, equally effective. There is no risk of muscle slippage or lost muscle. The cosmesis is superior. And if something prevents you from doing it, it's only your mind block. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth. I think Dr. Varsha, I think we'll comment at the end.
Yeah.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes.
Share my screen. At the outset, I would like to thank AIOS Scientific Committee for giving the opportunity. Plication versus resection. Both the muscles, both the techniques are muscle tightening procedures, and debate is which is better and advisable.
resection from my point of view is better because it is a traditional muscle strengthening procedure available for last 100 years, time tested with good results as against plication, which is a new procedure since 1991. I totally agree that one should develop new techniques and procedures, but should not follow them blindly. Plication is performed, as we all know, Madam has said, it is done with absorbable suture with 60Y3. It is absorbed over a period of 60 days, but it may cause muscle rip. Those similar results are present initially as resection and plication, but the long-term undercorrection is observed, and if one needs to plan overcorrection initially, may be a troublesome for the patient in immediate post-op period. Whereas resection, long-term results are good, more effective, where muscle is shortened and secured firmly to the sclera. It is maintained in the position and prevents long-term muscle drift. So more effective for long-term results, alignment. There are many studies. There is one study which surgical outcome following rectus muscle plication and resection in the JACOS 2018, where the success rate is at the end of 4 to 16 weeks for lateral rectus plication is similar, but for medial rectus plication it was 77.4%, whereas resection success rate was as high as 96.6%. In another study by Boston surgeons, similar results are obtained for up to 1 year, but long-term success rate was definitely more with resection, giving 89%. Then there is again another study with systemic review with meta-analysis, which in 2020 study study, and it showed that the success rate for plication was 66% at the end of 6 months. Resection, it was marginally high in this study, about 68%, but therefore we need to have a longer follow-up period. So whether plication really is effective after 5 to 10 years of surgery. So resection, I think, is better as long-term alignment is observed. Then plication spares anterior segment circulation. Yes, totally agree, but only if it is done correctly, because there are studies that anterior ciliary artery, both superior to muscle and the sclera while passing suture, may get damaged in plication also. Whereas anterior segment ischemia after strabismus surgery in one study has shown that the complications arise even after the microvascular dissection is done properly and even after doing vessel sparing surgery. So plication may not be totally safe. Then how many cases of anterior segment ischemia we see after resection? It is very rare in routine surgery, 1 in 13,000 to 1 in 30,000. It is a report. And it has, therefore, plication is helpful in specific high-risk cases like multiple muscle surgeries, reoperations, or elderly patients with muscular diseases. So plication may be tried in these cases, but it is not required in muscle surgeries routine. So then the slipped muscle, incidence of slipped muscle or lost muscle is definitely there with resection. But again, not in all routine cases, only when the muscle is tight or there is a restrictive strabismus. So very rare in routine resection. So it is an avoidable complication. So if done with care. Then,
sorry to interrupt, ma'am. We have to wrap up in the next 30 seconds.
So better cosmesis, madam has already shown you the initial redness and muscle visible bump of tissue is visible in early post-op period, which may remain there for 3 to 4 months, whereas in resection, if carefully done, cosmesis is very good. Then inflammation and resection may be there with hemorrhage and tissue reaction, but everything is settled and long-term alignment is good. Plication, madam has said, easy, okay, easy, but resection, we would like to ask all strabismologists here, is it a difficult surgery? It is a basic surgery taught to all PGs, and all trained surgeons can finish it in few minutes. So resection is not time consuming and is a fast surgery. So plication reversible, it is there, but only if it is done in first 1 month. After that, again, reversibility is not possible. Whereas resection, even if it is not possible, long-term results are good. We can do strengthening by advancement. Then we cannot do this shifting of muscles with AV patterns and with horizontal muscle surgeries where we want vertical deviation to be corrected. So shifting is possible with resection easily. So to conclude, that resection is a time-tested procedure with good long-term effects. It is temporary hemorrhage inflammation is there, but later on it goes. and complications like lost muscle is easily avoidable in resection. Plication is definitely indicated in specific conditions, but still old is gold, and I would think that resection is a procedure of choice in most of the cases. Thank you for the patient hearing.
Shubhangi, your comments, please.
Yes. So both the speakers presented their cases very well. To me, the main advantage of plication is there is less of bleeding, and that definitely spares the anterior segment circulation and allows you to operate a third rectus muscle at the same time. Most of the cases, especially in exotropia and all, we have an associated DVD where we need to operate a superrectus muscle. And so if we are doing an plication, we can do along with the LR also an superrectus procedure. Secondly, about the long-term results, which Varsha was saying could be less with plication, can be taken care with the procedure where we suture muscle, sclera muscle as described, as what Pradeep Sharma teaches us. So if you do that, take a muscle bite, scleral bite, and again a muscle bite, then the long-term results, probably we get a good result with plication. The only advantage I feel in doing resection is we can shift the muscles, which may not be very effective. We can do it with plication, but we may not be able, that may not be that effective. So in cases of AV phenomena where we have to do and muscle shifting, in those cases, resection outweighs plication. So for me, plication, considering the cosmesis, considering the bleeding, considering the safety, appears to be a better procedure. And for me, at least for last 1.5 years, 2 years, I've almost totally shifted to plication.
So we can move ahead as we are short of time. I think next session is on amblyopia, patching versus games as a treatment for amblyopia. Dr. Ramesh Murthy, Dr. Pradeep Deshpande, and Dr. Sanita Satyan. Another advantage of plication could be when we are doing 3 recti, maybe that's another advantage where you can prevent antireception.
That's what I said. We can operate a third recti.
Dr. Ramesh Murthy there?
Is anybody?
I'm afraid Dr. Ramesh Murthy isn't there in the session. Even for that matter, Dr. Pradeep Deshpande isn't also there in the session.
So we can go to the next topic.
Next, yeah. Dr. Chandresh. Dr. Love, you want to? I think it's on intermittent exotropia.
Dr. Chandresh and Dr. Rishikesh.
Is also not there in the session.
Rishikesh?
Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm there.
If you go ahead, I think you go ahead.
Sure.
Himalini has joined. Okay.
So shall I start?
Yeah, start.
I would like to thank the scientific committee AIOS for giving me an opportunity to present my trying to defend my decision of unilateral recess resect surgery for intermittent exotropia. According to Berrien's classification, there are 4 types of intermittent divergent squint. Mainly, it is the basic exotropia, where the deviation for distance and near is the same, a pseudo-divergence excess, a true divergence excess, or a convergence insufficiency. Basic exotropia is the most common, and the debate between doing a unilateral recess resect versus bilateral recession is something like, a debate whether the egg came first or the hen. But I will go with recess resect because a unilateral recess resect, you need to patch only one eye post-operatively, whereas in these cases, bilateral recession, perhaps you might need to patch both eyes, though that is not a major advantage. The other advantages I will tell you. One is the good alignment results which we get with unilateral recess resect. Also, the chances of post-operative exodrift are less due to the tethering effect of the resected muscle, the resected medial rectus which it has. So long-term exodrift is less. Also, the recess resect affects equally for distance and near. And also the patient acceptability is better. I mean, counseling the patient for bilateral surgery becomes a task at times. Just a few cases I will show. 1 week post-op unilateral recess resect case. Another patient who had an angle of around more than 45 prism diopters at 2 months, unilateral recess resect, the alignment result is good. This patient actually had more than 50 prism diopters. He was not ready for a both eye surgery in the same sitting. So keeping my fingers crossed, I did a unilateral recess resect, and even after 6 months, the alignment result is still good. I didn't have to go again. I burnt a finger doing a bilateral recession in a 14-year-old female who had a preoperative angle of around 50 prism diopters, and I did a bilateral recession at 2 weeks post-op. She had 20 prism diopters, and which increased to 30 prism diopters at 3 months. So I had to do a medial rectus in her case. So I went through the literature to find out why the unilateral recess resect perhaps fares better. None other than Kushner himself has suggested that recess resect procedure does better than bilateral recession in basic exotropia. Usually it affects the deviation for distance and near equally, and whereas bilateral recession tends to affect more for distance than for near, and also the tethering effect of the resected muscle, which I have already mentioned. Also, you get good fusion generated because of the alignment. It gives a good long-term alignment with recess resect. Also, there is increasing the dosage for bilateral recession, like doing more recession will actually result in lateral incompetence and diplopia in the extreme cases. True divergence excess is not as common, and as is seen in clinical examination, many of the cases, even if a divergence excess also, a unilateral recess resect might perform better. Another study by Pedic group has suggested a 3-month follow-up where they have suggested a suboptimal result with bilateral recession of around 46%, and usually this suboptimal result is an exotropia, whereas for recess resect, the suboptimal result is less than 37%, and it is esotropia, which might become ortho in the long run. Just a couple of meta-analysis studies. One is by a Chinese group. They have suggested for bilateral, unilateral recess resect, the odds ratio is 0.5, whereas for bilateral recession, it is around 2.44. Another meta-analysis by Medwave has suggested using 3 randomized trials and 2 systemic reviews that with unilateral recess resect, the chances of undercorrection and recurrence are lesser compared to bilateral recession. So given a choice, I will always opt for unilateral recess resect over a bilateral recession. Thank you.
Dr. Pandey, comments, please. I think the other was Dr. Ramesh is not there, Ramesh Murthy. Dr. Pandey. Sir, are you around for the comments? I saw his.
He's there, huh?
He's there now.
Yeah, he's there.
Dr. Pandey was there sometime before, but now he.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Sir, yeah.
I'm here. Actually, I didn't know my role in this session, so I thought I'll do something else. But then I just heard Dr. Rishikesh talking about resection and recession. I think he was talking about that. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Actually, this is a debate, sir, where Dr. Rishi Mai is for recess resect procedure as a choice for intermittent divergent squint versus bilateral laterictus recession.
Yeah. I think in my view, I do bilateral lateral rectus recessions, and I have had good, or if there's a large deviation, I do 3 muscles. This recession resection, I feel it makes it asymmetrical because, and there's also lid aperture changes, because this aperture at times it gets, it does get smaller if you look at it carefully cosmetically, and there could also be limitation of abduction, and basically it is asymmetrical surgery. And there's a lot of literature on this, and I think slowly it is veering around doing bilateral LR recessions rather doing resection and recession. Basically, maybe in basic, there also is a lot of literature saying that you should go in for bilateral recessions also do equally well. That's my feeling. And like if you have a V pattern, it becomes difficult to handle with just recession and resection. So if you do bilateral recessions, it is far more easier and it creates a symmetrical situation. And there are also issues of dominant eye and a lot of issues. I think it will need a much larger debate. So to my mind, we should do bilateral LR recessions. Rather, until there is a reason to do it is very valid.
Actually, can I make a comment, Dr. Suma?
I'm the convener only.
Okay, so I am for Dr. Rishikesh. Sorry, I'm with Dr. Rishi Mai, where I choose recess procedure for all intermittent divergent squints, and I feel the main advantage is that we know that IDSs have a chance of recurrence. There's always a chance of under and overcorrection. So if you've dealt with one eye, you always have virgin muscles to deal with the under or the overcorrection. So I personally prefer recess resect procedure.
So, but you are doing anyway 2 muscles. You know, if you're doing 3 muscles, that's a different issue. If you're doing 2 muscles, you are doing LR, bilateral LR or LR and MR. That's you are touching 2 muscles. And if you have a V pattern, I mean a large pattern, it is difficult to handle with recession and resection. And there's literature, I mean, controversial things are getting more into gray area. I mean, all those clear-cut indications in basic, you do this. It is under a lot of, I think.
With due respect to the time, can we move now to the next debate?
Yes. The next debate is on adjustable suture surgery versus non-adjustable suture surgery. Again, we have only one speaker, Dr. Kavita Kalayal Lalwani. We don't have Dr. Kalpit Shah in the. You can see that then Dr. Kalpit Shah is not there. Please, Dr. Kavita, please
Dr.
upload.
Suma, can I leave now? I have another session. Hello, Dr. Suma.
Sir, I'm just. So yes.
Yes, sir.
I would have
Yes,
loved
sir.
to
Yes,
be
sir.
with you, but can I leave if you permit?
Yes, sir. Go
Thank
ahead.
you so much, Dr. Suma. So nice. Thank you.
Ma'am, can I start?
Start, Kavita, start.
So I don't have an opposition, huh? So
I remember last time also you didn't have an opposition.
I
So
remember.
this
Yeah. It's not oppose me, ma'am. It's
I think everybody gets scared of when you are presenting.
She has decimated them before even starting.
yeah.
I think we need to have debate only.
Nobody can win again.
We can declare Kavita winner and be done with it.
Your 1 minute is over, Kavita.
Okay, come. See, that is what is there. Love. So to adjust or not to adjust. So what does it really mean? So it is the ability to modify the site of a muscle insertion and control the deviation in the immediate post-operative period to enhance surgical outcome. So why this dilemma, whether do we need to do this or not? Because strabismus surgery is wrought with these kind of situations where there is stability in the post-op period is a question, long-term predictability is doubtful, and reduction in the reoperation rate is a concern for all of us. So when should we do it or not do it? So when is the dilemma coming? Because strabismus is a complex disease. Patient profile and expectations are changing. Surgeons' expertise can be sometimes a challenge. And is it a time-consuming process to adjust? So best is to adjust when there are situations we have like sensory anomalies, like sensory tropias and patients with diplopia. These are situations where it is best to do adjustables. Muscles when they're weak, like after a palsy or paresis, myasthenia, where again predictability is a problem, we have to adjust. And resurgeries, already there is a unpredictability, so it's better that we adjust. So it's better in situations like restrictive strabismus when again the results are unpredictable, like Graves, thyroid, pterygium surgery, post-cataract surgery, etc. And it is good to adjust in all cooperative patients, actually, any type of strabismus. So adjustable recession techniques, there are these 2 standard types. Newer adjustable techniques are there for adjustable resections, adjustable transpositions, even 1-stage adjustment where you do the adjustment on table, and if there is a necessity, you adjust and tie it off. So the time factor doesn't come. So ultimately, a patient is happy and we are happy. So before surgery, and this is after adjustment, the patient is happy. So when not to adjust, so when we do some things, we have to be really sure when we should not do something. So absolute contraindication is in an uncooperative patient, obviously. Relative contraindication is when very high myopes, already sclera, we don't want to tamper the
eye after you do a surgery. Friable, thready muscles. Inferior rectus muscle is supposed to be technically difficult to adjust, so it's relatively a contraindication. So these are the supportive articles which tell us about. So my pointers to do adjustable surgery in strabismus surgery is, since we cannot cure, at least let's give optimal result. Since long-term success is not in our hands, at least let's control the immediate post-operative result. And since anyway we have to face recurrences, at least let's not have to face residual also. That is why I adjust. So I adjust because I can. Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Professor Vinita Singh, ma'am is here. Ma'am is also not there for comments. Okay, I think Kavita has very nicely presented, and her points are very relevant, that whenever, I think most of us, if we can do adjustable, all of us should know at least to do adjustable surgery, because sometimes in some cases you really need, you cannot plan it beforehand, and you may need to do an adjustable surgery on in the OR. Do you do in children, Kavita? Like which age
No,
group?
I have done, the youngest patient is 19-year-old. I haven't done in children now.
Because there are a lot of papers which say that they do adjustable in children.
Yeah,
So I was just wondering whether in India we could do like a propofol later and propofol say or something, like no, we can
actually
just do a minimal.
For this talk, I have prepared like this, ma'am, but I'm more of a non-adjusting person actually in real life as well as strabismus management.
I think we should. I think yes, as we grow senior, we know which case, what are our measurements and what are our outcomes. So that's why most of us have switched. Even I was doing first adjustable, and now mostly it is non-adjustable. Only very rare cases where you have to really adjust. Dr. Love, any comments?
I also do mostly non-adjustable, ma'am.
Yes, I used to do a lot of adjustable sutures earlier. Now most of them non-adjustable, fixed sutures.
Yeah.
Yes. I have a point, ma'am.
Okay.
Can I have a comment, madam?
Yeah, sure.
Actually, I also used to do adjustable for the unpredictable cases, but most of the cases I had to tie as such. So now I am mostly shifting to the non-adjustable ones. And another thing is the lowest stage I have done is 12 years. The child allowed adjustment under topical, but the surgery was done under GA.
Okay. So we move to the next. Thank you all for your comments. We move to the next, that is inferior oblique myectomy versus inferior oblique recession. Again, we don't have Dr. Nikhil here. We have Dr. Satyam. And of course, Madam Meenakshi, Dr. Meenakshi is there for the comments. I hope Dr. Meenakshi is around. Yes.
Yes, she's there.
Hello. So Dr. Satyam.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, if I'm audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Even your screen is visible.
Okay. It's not getting full. Yeah. So, good evening, everyone, and thanks AIC for giving me such a wonderful virtual platform. Okay. If I'm audible right now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, good evening, everyone, and thanks AIC for giving me such a wonderful virtual platform. My favor on inferior oblique surgery will be recession. As per literature review, Park found recession to be the most effective procedure. Copper and Sandel demonstrated a correction of 6.88 prism diopters in primary gauge and 12.3 prism diopter in the field of action of inferior oblique. Studies by Shipman and Berg, as well as by Kashke and Scott, further add evidence to the correction of inferior oblique overaction by recession. Mittelman and Falk showed a 9 prism diopter of correction by 10 to 12 millimeter of inferior oblique recession. Here is the point. Calibration is the key to success, and this key is missing with myectomy. Metanittel found a dose-response relation for iorecession surgery. He told that IO recession can be titrated according to the severity of IO overaction. Since we have different size of clothes for different people, so surgery should also be titrated according to the requirement of the patient. Added advantage to calibration is preservation of the muscle, which allow for revision surgery if required, which is not possible with myectomy. As per most of the reports, success rate of myectomy is better than recession, but they all have accepted +IO overaction post-operatively as subclinical and asymptomatic. However, when Minitel accepted +1 IO overaction as failure criteria, he detected a recurrence starting in the first month in myectomized eyes. That too is progressively increasing over a 20-month follow-up period. Park reported a 15% recurrence rate with recession procedure and 37% with myectomy. Myectomy is usually associated with post-operative bleeding if the ends are not properly cauterized and or because of the associated damage to neurovascular bundle. Adherence syndrome is a rare but serious complication that occurs due to adherence of free ends of muscle to sclera or to one another, and it has been reported that 13% of
I'm afraid that we cannot listen to you, sir. Are you there still? Logged in? Dr. Satyam? I think because of some issues, Dr. Satyam not be seen in the meeting. Till the time he's logging in, can we move to the next speakers?
Can I finish commenting?
Yeah, Dr. Meenakshi can do a comment.
I can finish commenting because I'm sorry, I'm in the OPD and I have other fellows as well. That's why I'm wearing a mask. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, friends. It's so nice to see all friends here. Elizabeth, Suma. So wonderful to see everybody. I think I spotted Love some time back. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to comment. And Dr. Satyam made my job easy because I am actually a recession person. I hardly ever do myectomy. So it made my life easy. And plus he had no opponent. So we declared him a winner in the debate. But having said that, I think myectomy does have a place. In my own experience, I do agree with Dr. Satyam that it is a good idea to titrate the amount
if
of.
I'm audible right now?
You're audible. Even I'm audible. I'm just kidding.
Okay, ma'am. Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah, do you
Yeah,
want
I'm
to finish?
disconnected actually, ma'am.
Okay, I know, we know. So if
Nothing,
I may,
ma'am.
I just declared you
most of the
winner, Dr.
points.
Satyam. Okay, I'm not, okay. We
Pardon,
declared
ma'am?
you the winner, Dr. Satyam.
Thanks, ma'am.
Okay, so I just wanted to say when it's a clear cut, for example, a case of superior oblique palsy, and you have a 3 or 4 plus inferior oblique overaction, I think myectomy has a place. However, if it is an infantile esotropia kind of situation where you don't know if there is a coexisting DVD, then you are better off doing a recession in case you have to revise it to an anterior transposition later. So in that way, a recession is a safer procedure. And yes, it's more time consuming and it is a little bit more learning curve. But an adherence syndrome can occur in both because that is how you have isolated the muscle. If you went and messed with the posterior tenons and there is fat prolapse, you can have adherence syndrome in both. Okay, so I agree with Dr. Satyam that inferior oblique recession is the way to go. But don't forget myectomy in a few select situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meenakshi, for the wonderful comments. And let's go on to the next speakers. It's on superior oblique tendon lengthening versus superior oblique tendon expander. Hi, Dr. Satyam. Sorry, what happened? Dr. Jitendra Jitani is here and Dr. Wrinkle Pushkathe.
I'm here, ma'am.
Wrinkle is here? Okay.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Hi, Jitendra. Start. Yeah, please start.
Should I start or Wrinkle? I'm starting, right?
Yeah, you're starting. Yeah.
Okay. Just give me a second. I will just share this slide. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank for this wonderful opportunity. And this particular surgery, I think we had a similar debate some time back. I think we discussed most of the things there. Also, I think it was Wrinkle only. She was speaking on supraoblique tendon expander. So supraoblique split lengthening is I think it's a wonderful procedure. Indications, I think both of our indications are similar, and that is probably the reason why we are debating. The indications for supraoblique weakening are supraoblique overaction, Brown syndrome, and presence of A pattern, and split lengthening fits in all of these things. I think the whole principle and everything is very similar in supraoblique tendon expanders and supraoblique split lengthening. The basic premise is that we are lengthening the muscle with the help of silicon expander in case of Dr. Wrinkle. So it is normally I don't think silicon expanders are much used in simple overactions. Normally it is used for Brown syndrome. My major issues with silicon expander is that it is a non-physiological procedures. Extrusion is quite common, and most of us have switched to chicken sutures if at all we are not doing split lengthening. There is always a foreign body in the eye because it is a 240 band, which is 6 to 7 millimeters long. A small video of split lengthening. This is my own video. Actually, this is one of the first surgeries which I did years back, and it is quite simple. It can be staged. The good part of split lengthening is that you can stage it. You have to use a non-absorbable sutures. There are no chances of extrusion. Yes, it can be debated that there's a chance of cut through, but I've never, myself, I've never seen it. We did a study on the effect of torsion and found that each millimeter relative intorsion of 1 degree, minimum and maximum for us is around 4 to 7.5. And this is so basically what you are doing is you are tying two ends of supraoblique in such a way that there is a Z lengthening. This is the Z lengthening. You just have to remember that you have to split it from the center and then get two ends. Now you tie the two ends. Now here we are ready. These are the two ends, and then you have to pass sutures, and you can just anastomose the two ends and get an eventual lengthening of the muscle. So I think it is. This is our paper which we published way back a few years back with Dr. Kuntal. And per millimeter reduces an intorsion of 1 degree. Both the surgeries are similar. Major difference is obviously that the way the angle is, the muscle is being elongated. And this is about the complications of a tendon expander. I don't think there's a except that tendon expander does have a chance of extrusion. So that was regarding supraoblique split lengthening from my side. Thank you so much.
And that's a very nice presentation. Dr. Wrinkle, you can go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. I thank the All India Conference for giving me this opportunity. And I'll be talking on superior oblique tendon expander as the preferable mode for superior oblique weakening. So these are the indications for superior oblique weakening. An ideal option for weakening should be some surgery which corrects the abnormal head posture, which improves the elevation in adduction.
And sorry to interrupt, ma'am, your presentation is not visible here.
Is it so, ma'am? Just a second. Are you able to see it, ma'am?
No, ma'am. Yes, it just started.
Yeah. So an ideal situation would be, ideal surgery would be something which corrects the abnormal head posture, improves the elevation in adduction, which lengthens the tendon, but at the same time, it should not cause palsy, and it should be able to tackle asymmetry like in A and lambda pattern. These are various options for superior oblique weakening. Tenotomy had been associated with fat adherence and scarring. SO recession is an uncontrolled procedure and it changes the insertion characteristics. And PTSO is also found to be a relatively weak procedure. So here comes the role of SO expanders, which was introduced by Kenneth Wright in 1991. The material used is 240 silicon band, which is 2.5 millimeter wide and 0.6 millimeter thick. And you also need a 50 ethibond suture, a non-absorbable suture to secure it. I thank Dr. Subhangi Bhave madam for lending me this video. So here, as we can see that it was a superotemporal approach, and then the superior oblique was dissected and isolated nasal to the superior rectus. Two anchoring sutures were placed a few millimeters apart on the superior oblique tendon, and then the tendon was cut in between these two anchoring sutures. These are non-absorbable sutures, and then you introduce the silicone band of desired width in between the two cut tendon ends, and you secure it with a non-absorbable suture. And at the end of the surgery, you do the force exaggeration guidance test. The most important advantage, I think, of expander is that it gives you a graded quantitative slackening, and which is very useful in cases of asymmetric cases. For 1+ SO overaction, you use 4 millimeter of band, and for every grade of increase, you add 1+ to the length. Another important advantage is that tendon insertion is maintained and medial and lateral compartments are maintained. The band also holds the cut tendons apart and hence prevents adhesion. It is a reversible procedure. You may remove the band, and it is also an adjustable procedure. You may adjust the length of the band if required. And as it has less chance of post of diplopia, it is very advantageous in patients with fusion. Only minus point will be a scar, which might be easily prevented with good surgical technique. And these are studies which show the advantage of SO expander. So a controlled, reversible, adjustable, predictable option is SO tendon expander with silicone band. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Saurabh Sanyal is here for the comments. Any specific cases, Dr. Jitendra, you would prefer superior oblique lengthening to an expander? Because most of us are doing expander surgery.
To be honest, madam, I have stopped doing expanders. I mean, honestly speaking, I have stopped doing expanders mainly because all the advantage of expanders, like reversible, not reversible, but the fact that you cannot actually easily reverse the expander. It is quite a lot of fibrosis. You can theoretically, but if I have to do expander, I go for chicken sutures. I seriously don't do expander. I do split lengthening and I do chicken sutures. Most of my cases I have started.
When we have switched to chicken suture, so, I mean, I meant even that as an expander. But yes, silicone band. We have any other comments? I think Dr. Saurabh is not here. Dr. Shubhangi, you want to say any comments? How with Dr. Wrinkles? I think she's also not there. I think let's move to the next. Thanks, Jitendra and Wrinkle.
Thank you, ma'am.
Most welcome. Thank you so much.
So we go to the next, that is IOL under the age of 1 year or no IOL under the age of 1 year. Dr. Akila is here.
Yeah, Dr. Akila will be presenting from Dr. Kavita's login.
I'm just presenting from Kavita's.
But I think Dr. Sajani Shah is not here to debate with you. So yours is IOL under the age of 1 year and she was no IOL, no?
Yes, mine is, I'm for IOL under.
Okay, okay. So I think Dr. Love and I can debate with you. Let's see. Though I prefer IOL. Let's see.
See, even I would prefer IOL in children less than a year. So
I think you'll have to slideshow, huh?
Okay, I would generally prefer to implant IOL in children less than 1 year as long as it is safe. So why? Because IOLs generally provide a permanent method of optical correction, and it provides minimal anisoconia and provides a stable retinal image. So, but why are we still debating on this topic? Because till date, there is no consensus among the pediatric cataract surgeons, and there is lack of robust evidence in the literature regarding this. And this was evident by the Delphi approach on pediatric cataract surgeons, where they could not come to a consensus as whether intraocular lenses are safer in children lesser than 1 year. And there was yet another nationwide survey in UK and Ireland using the questionnaires, and even that could not come to a consensus whether all pediatric ophthalmologists would prefer implanting intraocular lenses in children lesser than 1 year. So the reason being, there are a lot of issues in children when it comes to implanting an IOL, and there are various concerns that need to be taken into consideration before we really plan to implant an IOL, and whether that eye would be appropriate for the same. So when is again $1 million question, and the two main answers, the questions that needs to be answered are whether this IOL implantation would improve the visual outcome of these children, and whether the adverse rates are going to vary because of the implantation of the intraocular lenses. So the best evidence that we have in children who are more than 7 months but lesser than 1 year is the IATS study. We go by the guidelines, and unilateral cataracts lesser than 7 months, of course, we usually do not prefer to implant an intraocular lens, whereas in a child who's above 7 months, we would definitely, if the axial length as well as the corneal diameter are well within the normal range, we would definitely go in and implant an intraocular lens. Because this, main outcome measure of the IATS was that there was no difference in the visual outcome in children who were treated with intraocular lenses versus those who were rehabilitated with aphakic correction with either contact lenses or with spectacles. Now, the other study which would favor an intraocular lens in children lesser than 1 year is the LVPA study, which was done by Ramesh Kikunya et al. And where they analyzed the safety profile and the visual outcome of primary intraocular lens implantation in infants who were lesser than 7 months. And they again came with the conclusion that primary implantation of intraocular lenses is appropriate in selected infants. I mean, the children who do not have any anterior segment dysgenesis with the corneal diameter, which is more than 10 millimeters, and axial length, which was appropriate for that age. They still found a favorable outcome, and it was comparable to those children who were left aphakic. So now this IOL under 2 study was done on bilateral cataracts, and again this, although did not study the adverse effects in children with bilateral cataracts, they found that the visual outcome was similar between the 2 groups. Now the last this thing is the Vasavada et al. Study, which was done on 60 children with the bilateral cataracts, and again they found that the visual outcome and the adverse effects were actually comparable, and if you see the adverse effects much lesser than those that was reported in the IATS study. And this again is another study which was done by the Jaspreet Sukhja, where they found the outcome of the intraocular lens implantation in infants, and they again found a lower incidence of the adverse effects as compared to the IATS study. So this is a meta-analysis on the incidence of glaucoma in children who were left aphakic versus those who were implanted with an intraocular lens. This meta-analysis actually came up with a gross variation in the incidence of the glaucoma. They found that the incidence was much lesser in those who were pseudophakic versus those that were aphakic. So my verdict would be IOL implantation, but proper selection of children is very, very important. And of course, experienced hands makes a lot of difference in the final visual outcome. Thank you.
It's 3:30.
No opponent?
No opponent. Dr. Mehul, you want to add some comments? I think Dr. Mehul Shah is here, and then we can also debate. Dr. Mehul Shah is, I think, I saw him there in the platform.
He was there, ma'am, but I cannot see him now.
Shall I say something?
Yeah, sure. We'll only debate now.
Yeah, they say that late postoperative myopia after 6, 7, or 8 years of age or 9 years of age is much more in IOL implantation under 1 year of age. So if you wait till 2 years and then do IOL implantation, the myopia is much less. That is one recent publication is there. And especially I want to know whether for unilateral cataract or bilateral cataract, she will do IOL implantation.
Bilateral cataracts in children more than 8 months of age, if the axial length and the corneal diameter is within the normal range. That is corneal diameter more than 10 millimeters and axial length more than 18 millimeters. Even in bilateral cataracts, we go ahead and put in an intraocular lens.
Okay, then if you follow it up for 8, 9, 10 years, the chance of myopia is very high. That's a recent publication. I forgot the name of the publication.
The other problem is if you those are in patients who you undercorrect less. That's what is happening. Even if you've undercorrected +8.
Yeah, even
like 8 or 20%. What I've seen is that when you undercorrect less, because like if you do like less of undercorrection, those give a lot of myopic shift. And if you have left, like if you have undercorrected 8 so that you have a residual of 10, that high hypermetropia hardly goes into really myopic shifts. I mean, this is what I've seen. Like they remain high hyper. That's another problem.
Oh, okay.
So and then they are again amblyopic. So it's like we don't know what. It's still not so because if you make them hyperopic and then they still remain. Any else? Anyone else want to comment?
Dr. wants to contribute.
Yeah, sure, Doctor.
Only one remark here. The problem is, I think the decision is nowadays only anatomical, whether they are anatomically all right to put the lens. But the second most why there is so much of angst about putting IOL is because DVR is very, very, I mean, your lens power calculation is very, very
not accurate.
Absolutely unpredictable in between two eyes of the same patient. I have got +1 in one eye and +8 in the other with the same person.
Yeah, it's true.
They are under anesthesia. So sometimes that makes your decision sometimes a little bit dicey because of very, very inaccurate and if the eyes are smaller, your margin of error is also very small. So your the price for a very small error can be magnified very much because of a small dimension of the eye. So I think technically it's not a challenge to put the IOL. You can always put the IOL in any child. But problem is to manage it postly and to reach to some kind of a reasonable outcome. That is a challenge. Without getting glaucoma.
Some cases they have a myopic shift. Some cases have a
glaucoma, refractive surprises, and amblyopia and everything.
And there is no harm in
it. Glaucoma is more in aphakic children rather than in pseudophakic.
That's right.
Much more in aphakic.
That's right. That's right.
No, actually, actually, the IOL is neutral. There is equal amount of. It's the age of the child. Only one risk factor which has been consistently proved.
Glaucoma is more related to the age of the surgery, especially in earlier you operate.
Yes, earlier you operate, the more likely you are getting.
Yeah, like especially when in very small babies, then you do keep it aphakic.
Yeah, a lot of our aphakic kids don't come really at the age of 6 weeks and 8 weeks.
Yeah, you don't.
At 4 months. So for them, if you look at 6 months surgery difference, there won't be any difference between aphakic in glaucoma.
We will take one question from Dr. Leela Mohan in the audience. She's asking that if axial length is larger, will you defer IOL implantation even in infants? Suppose if it is less than 1 year age, but axial length is adequate.
I would say
that keratometry changes very fast at that age. It is not the axial length. The keratometry changes very fast. That makes it more unpredictable. And second is in infant aphakia treatment trial, one of the points that they had noticed that resurgery rate is very high in infants who had IOL implantation due to visual axis opacification. Even after a knee surgery, the resurgery rate is almost 3 times higher if IOL is implanted in infants.
Sir, that's also because it was a multi-centric trial, sir. I think it was a multi-centric trial, and the surgical skill, I would still be skeptical that they had uniform surgical skill.
Yeah, I also
So
agree with that. And
that is one of the major reasons why they required resurgery. I don't see as many glaucoma children, and I do measure intraocular pressure of all the children post-op regularly, religiously, but somehow our incidence of glaucoma is much less compared to Western population.
And even I agree, I have hardly seen any glaucoma cases.
Yeah, and I think a lot goes into the surgical skill because, you know, they don't, I mean, it's a public forum I am speaking, but Indian surgeons are better. Whatever, everything said and done.
I think our numbers are very, very high. That's
High,
why
yeah, that's why.
That's the reason.
the surgical skills are more. No, but one.
But madam, they are better. That is the fact of the matter is that they are better. That's the point. I mean, we are doing more numbers, but less complications.
I have a little difference of opinion with you on Jitendra on glaucoma. Glaucoma is something which is related to the number of years of follow-up. So you may not,
I do agree.
No, we are also doing long-term follow-up.
What I am saying is
Long-term follow-up. It's not so high.
Yeah, 3-year follow-up, you will not have any glaucoma.
No, this is 10 years follow-up. All of us here have more than 10 years, I think.
Yeah, so 30% glaucoma.
Much less than what is there in literature.
Yeah, don't even say that our glaucoma is less.
No, it's okay, fine.
even 30% is less, madam. Even 30% is less. If your incidence is 30% after 25 years, it is less.
They have reported very high. They have
Very high,
reported
yes.
Very high. That's what we are debating on that.
The glaucoma, the problem is lot of it is definitions are not consistent. Now, at least thanks to IATS, we have a clear definition what you will say glaucoma and what you will not. So the incidence varies from 20 to 60%.
No, even if children are having a large myopic shift, we are measuring the pressure just to check. Because if there is a sudden change in myopia, that's also one of the indications that.
Yeah,
but definitely it is lesser.
I agree. I have to agree, but
Okay.
So every
Dr. Love, what say? Do we continue or I think there is time.
I'll just read one comment from Dr. B.S. Goel regarding recess resect versus bilateral recession. He's writing that bilateral lateral rectus recession is preferable as most cases are divergence excess and basic, but very few are convergence insufficiency where recess resect may be better. How many of do you agree with this?
So it is, I mean, I try to defend recess resect, but it's not that I never do bilateral recession. Something like even Kavita suggested that she's not it's not that she does adjustable. But for basic exotropia, yes, I will always prefer a recess resect over a bilateral.
Yeah, I would like to differ. Because, you know, after squint surgery, what the patient wants is symmetry of the two eyes. So if you do bilateral symmetrical lateral rectus recession, that is definitely superior. The palpebral fissure will be of the same size. So the cosmesis is better with bilateral recession than recess resect. Long term also, if you do recess resect and compare with both eyes, there will be slight palpebral fissure changes and some this thing. So it's better to do recess resect if possible. That is my
what Sir mentions, if there's a convergence sufficiency type, maybe what he means by the near is more than
then you have to have the resection. Then you have to have the resection. That is, I agree.
Can I have a card?
But for larger deviations, if it is 50 prisms and it's a long-standing exotropia, you would still do.
Resection has to be done.
That is agreed. 3 muscle surgery. Less than 50 prism only, you can do 2 muscles.
What we can do, we can just have a short discussion on the last topic.
Like recession, does it have any connection with slightly chances of overcorrection with myopic children? I think does everybody in panel?
Just repeat. Sorry, Sumita.
Bilateral lateral rectus recession, is it more associated with overcorrections in myopic children?
Even I have seen in a few children, yeah. I always measure them again with contact lenses.
No, I'm not talking about moderate myopes, like up to 5 diopters and all. Not really well.
Take the measurement with the spectacles or not?
Spectacles, with spectacles.
With the spectacles, then there may be some prism error may be happening. Without the spectacles or contact lens, if you measure, I think.
No, she's asking for less than 5 prisms. She's asking for less than 5 prisms. Yeah, but less than 5 diopters. But
contact
Dr.
lenses,
Sumita, even I have
spectacles
seen
will
even with less than 5, two of my adult patients had consecutive ET. And then, yeah.
All my bilateral lateral rectus resections in whom I had overcorrection, consecutive ET, they're all myopes.
No. In my hands, it does not occur. Maybe it's a personal.
I have had one or two.
I have started.
I'm a person who does bilateral recession much more than recess resect.
So this was my observation. So I just wanted to ask if everybody else has also something similar.
We still have 10 minutes time. So next topic is patching before surgery or going direct for surgery in infantile esotropia.
Both the speakers are not there.
Yeah, you tell your opinion.
Always patching before surgery.
Yeah, always patching.
How
Always
long?
patching, yeah.
Infantile esotropia, if it is freely alternating, definitely alternate patch. If it is related to only in one eye, then unilateral patch has to be given before surgery.
And how long will you patch before surgery? What?
Long. How many hours you are asking?
How many months?
1 to 2 hours per day. Not
Till,
6 hours.
I mean, this is what age group? See, the infantile esotropia, I don't know, is it a child who's presented at 1 year, 2 years, or 8 years?
That age.
Because this debate.
It should be specific.
No,
8 years, you don't have to do alternate patch.
Yeah, that's no. For the patching, sometimes I think what this topic could be that maybe patching is not required in very high, like a child is presenting at 8 years with 50-60% of esotropia. Would you patch or not patch before surgery? I would still patch.
If there is any amblyopia, unilateral amblyopia, you patch. Otherwise, there's no point in patching.
That's what the discussion.
Equal vision in both eye and 80-year-old child. There is no point in patching. What are you going to gain?
Well, there is no reason for patching. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, then the question is not there. I think question is whether it has to be a question. I mean, if there is no, if the vision is good in both eyes, what will patching achieve? Patching is what we all, I mean, I think the question was that whether, you would patch and then go for surgery if there is a amblyopia or something like that.
Suppose one eye is unmaintained, then we do the
Then
patch.
I think we will patch.
We will patch, yeah.
Jitendra, even if the vision is equal, sometimes these infantile esotropes can have a little bit of abduction limitation, apparent abduction limitation.
Yeah, that is, madam, if
The motivator is
if they are very young, madam.
very young. Yeah.
After, that's
Less
what
than
I'm
2
saying.
years, infantile esotropia, definitely alternate patch has to be given.
Yes,
To avoid cross fixation, to improve abduction, to prevent any amblyopia.
Prevent any saturation. All that can happen. I'm talking about very young children, very young.
Very young children, yes.
Less than 2 years, yeah. We'll have to do patching.
It's probably better to do some patching before.
Even you break the dominance, no?
Dr. Chandni
Dr. Love, anything else?
Was the expert commentator in this. Dr. Chandni, what is your opinion regarding this?
First, I will start with patching, and after that, surgery. And if there is in older children, if there is amblyopia, then only patching. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I didn't hear the question, sir. Dr. Love.
No, same on the same topic.
The same.
Okay. No, we do patch if there is amblyopia, as everybody. Actually, the whole discussion started without. I mean, we all thought that it is about young children. When Suma Madam said ki, infantile esotropy, very true that it can occur at any age. I mean, the patient can present at any age, but we all presumed ki it was infantile eso tha, so we presumed that it would be for the younger kids. I mean, so we just
actually it's patching or not actually should not be a debate because you should patch. Yeah. Ideally, it should not even be a debate.
So we can conclude now.
I have a comment.
Oh,
Yes,
sir.
Nice meeting you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I think I'll be aggressive with infantile esotropia and no alternate patching and all. If one eye is likely to be little amblyopic or so, then I always do penalization, not patching. So put atropine once a week, and once it alternates, go for surgery after waiting for a month. And regarding the other points, intermittent divergence squint, we many times miss the true divergence. We don't measure the deviation. I think what we do is 6 meters we do. Some clinics, I think they have a mirror. And so now I think with the COVID, we opened the door always, the door is kept open. So I just focus the child with the crowd waiting outside, and it is infinity. Before I used to have a window. So true divergence, if you really see, then I think you can plan whether bilateral, lateral rectus. And I agree with Elizabeth, the eye becomes a little smaller. So sometimes what I do is if one eye is a little bigger than the other eye before surgery, and do R&R in that child, not bilateral, lateral rectus.
Yeah.
But with even divergence excess, we did a series wherein we had R&R also worked equally good, almost 50 cases. And in the myectomy and inferior oblique, I think I learned from Marshall Fox, he always does myectomy for 1+, 2+, and 3+. And only 4+ he does the denervation and extirpation of the inferior oblique, which sometimes causes even tilt to the opposite side, causing so much of hypertrophy of the inferior oblique. And apart from that, I think patch versus games, I always club all patching, games, and also anti-suppression exercises. You'll have to fire them with like Air Force, Army, and Navy. Okay, so the amblyopia has to be treated at the fastest pace. And single stage with topical also, I think has been a good technique for adjustable. Otherwise, I don't do adjustable. American surgeons, half of them do adjustable sutures. But I think the muscle will be in a state of shock most of the time the next day. Then I think when we see post-op 1 month later, they drift. Even last month, I had a case which had a consecutive ESO, but now it is showing a residual EXO of 20 prisms within 1 month. So it's so much, the muscles are cranky like human beings. I don't think adjustable works that much unless it's very rare indications like thyroid myopathies, detachment surgeries done, etc., etc. I think these are the comments I have. I think excellent speeches by all, one and all. And Suma conducted very well. And I'm happy to see Shankar Netralaya team all representing all the 6 consultants. And Love is also part of Shankar Netralaya, then other gentlemen. I think
Sir, good evening, sir. Good evening,
show.
sir. I'm extremely happy to see the program happening again after Pediatric Ophthalmology Annual Conference. And it's the same commentators, same speakers. So I could not see that time. I'm very happy to see spectator this time because I could not see that program. I'm so grateful whosoever has put the same program, what I made on annual conference. Thanks a lot.
Hearty congratulations, Shreyas. I think you are always in the limelight. Recently, again, you have been awarded. God bless
Thank
you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot, sir. We need your blessings, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I think it's 3:55. Love, I think, can we wind up and hand it over to the...
One comment, there is a question from audience that can intermediate exotropia with poor control convert to alternate exotropia after a long duration? Just one short comment on that. We'll wind up.
No, I didn't get it. Intermittent exotropia?
Can convert to a permanent squint after long duration if
Yes.
the control is poor.
Yes.
It happens, I think, as they grow. I think the eye which is little amblyopic or with the anisometropias, I think that eye will go for a constant deviation. And many times I think the whole 1.5 hours, nobody talked about the fixation patterns also. So we'll have to give a lot of importance to the fixation, foveal fixation. If there is a foveal fixation, they continue to be intermittent for a very long time. And a pair of foveals may go in for a constant ESO or exotropias. No, intermittent divergent squint, so constant exotropias. And sometimes, they hide, and then when you examine in the room, even 50 prisms of EXO, they will be able to control so well, even in spite of taking them for infinity. So always better to check the photographs of the parents and always believe the parents. If they say that the drift is so much, believe the parents and examine the child again and again, then you may get the 50 prisms. And whereas actually the previous visit, it will be orthophoric. Any number of times you examine, they control so well. So that should not be misguided. So checking with the photographs and checking the previous reports, they must have seen Jatani and then they must have come to you, or they must have seen me and then they must have gone to Jatani or Love, like that. So it has to be better to check and recheck. Again, before surgery also, once again recheck after they get admitted, and then recheck on the table before giving anesthesia, so that you don't miss the wrong child, wrong muscle, especially high volume surgery like Shankara Nethralaya and other centers. It is better to check and recheck. Thank you, Love. Anything else?
Thank you. I think Dr. Suma, you can conclude.
Thank you everyone for participating so actively in the session. I think we'll conclude because it's already going to go for the session. Thank you, sir, Dr. Surendran, for always words of encouragement. Thank you, sir, so much.
You're great, Suma. I think you did my job very easy. Take care.
Thank
Take
you.
care, all of you. Take care of COVID.
Bye, sir.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Dr. Suma.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for the great inputs that we had.